welcome back to the Nikki and Reuel podcast experience. I'm Reuel Sample, joined by Nikki Bascom, back from her vacation.
Oh, don't ruin my night already. Jeez.
Well, before we go any farther, this is a public service announcement that if you are watching this show, I just want people to understand that we are the fascists that our grandparents warned us about. So I just want you to know that that is from Facebook. We are the fascists that the grandparents were warned about. Bree, you certainly were not listening to your grandparents, because we ain't fascists, especially the ones that your grandparents. But if you are listening, just a word of advice. So, welcome.
I'm so honored that his grandparents were talking about us. That's fascinating. It's a her. You never know these days.
Yeah, it's a her.
I'm so impressed that her grandparents, even her grandparents, knew about the Wilmington Conservative.
I know. Cool. That's amazing. And we've only been in existence for 3 months, so that's pretty good. So, Nikki, we've got a great guest tonight, a friend of both of ours. Why don't you introduce who that is?
How many greats?
It's like the grandparents who warned us about the fascists that we are.
Yeah, you better watch this one, because this person causes trouble everywhere he goes. I mean, we might get cut off at some point. But I am so happy to introduce Nick Craig to the show.
Nick Craig's with us tonight. Good evening, Nick.
I might cause so much trouble that I might get fired. I mean, that's a very real possibility. I've had some experience with that over the last couple of months.
That is, yes, but the person firing you would be you.
You.
Well, not if you guys fire me from my appearance, then you guys would be fired.
Look, we're so desperate for guests, we're not going to fire you at all.
We're not firing anybody. We might get up and leave.
We're not picky, and we're not proud. So welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
It's good to see you. You are back on the air, but you are not on the airways. You are on the Nick Craig Show. Tell us about your show right off the bat.
Yeah, so for folks that, of course, remember the days of the past on terrestrial radio here in Wilmington, that opportunity's doors closed about 6 months ago, and back now about a month old with a podcast, the Nick Craig Show, very similar to what the morning show used to be, a little bit more streamlined, still covering the news and the issues of the day. We spent some time on the show earlier this week talking about an anti-Trump protest in Wilmington. So very similar content to what's taken place in the past.
You are really actually tearing it up. I've got something that from your show today. Let me bring that up here. Hang on just a second.
Listen. Do not fall for the lies. Do not fall for the gaslighting when you see a name like Women Organized for Wilmington, Women Organizing for Wilmington, the name of this group. Do not fall for the sham. Do not fall for the gaslighting that this is some nonpartisan group of people. These are flaming, progressive, radical leftists. And I use the word leftists very intentionally there. These are not just liberals. These are hardcore leftists that run these organizations. I don't know who said that. Whoever was that passionate about that needs to be fired. I actually agree with what Nikki said earlier.
But Nikki, we're going to start doing our show like this. I'll start talking off to the side like this and not actually looking at the screen.
I don't know. That's not a good look for me. I can't do that.
I'm told that my best side is all the way around. So, but
Turn around.
Nick, you were going to town on these folks, and you are calling them for what they are. Is that something that has become freeing for you in this new media that you're exploring?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. My political ideology, my political opinion is not hidden. I will make the point day after day that I am a conservative, a Republican, whatever word you'd like to use to describe my political ideology. I'm not going to hide away from that. I'm not going to shy away from it. I don't go on the show or even when I'm generally interacting with people and go, oh, I'm a middle of the road kind of. No, I'm very clear with what I am and what I stand for. And it's incredibly frustrating as you watch these, as I called them, left-wing activist groups that always masquerade themselves under this idea that they are a nonpartisan group. It's a way in which they try and control the narrative and act as if they're welcoming to all sides. I mean, there's an education group here locally that claims the same thing, yet they have public meetups and say, if you're a Democrat, you're welcome to attend. That's who they're actively inviting to their groups on one side of their mouth, and then on the other, they'll claim that they're a nonpartisan organization. You've got to pick a lane. You're either truly nonpartisan and you want to bring everybody into the fold, everybody into the conversation, or you're on the left or you're on the right. Either way is fine. I just don't like this fence sitting that these groups attempt when the practical reality is they are incredibly far to the left.
I don't know of any conservative groups that call themselves nonpartisan without saying, "Hey, we've got a right leaning." The Wilmington Conservative, we are right leaning.
Oh, really? I thought you guys were nonpartisan. Based on the name, I assume nonpartisan.
We are right leaning, and sometimes we're actually right. But
we're always right.
We're always right. But it seems to be a hallmark that these folks. Wow, I like the name. Wow, Women of Wilmington. That they just hide behind and they don't tell people, well, yeah, we're pushing a liberal agenda here.
I think what's interesting about it is if they immediately say this, the creator, founder, organizer of this group, the first words out of her mouth were, we're a nonpartisan organization. And then and I unfortunately had to listen to an hour and 40 minutes of this. The entire thing
shared it with us. I mean, gee, thanks.
Then for an hour and 35 minutes after that, it was how Republicans and conservatives, Trump, Elon Musk, David Rouser, Ted Budd, Tom Tillis, how they are just the most awful, terrible people that have ever existed in history. So they get it right out of the gate. They say it, but if you listen to anything that they produce after they make this claim of being nonpartisan, it immediately falls apart.
One of them even said that she's losing sleep. Hang on, I got that one.
Panic
attacks.
Panic attacks, that's right.
Which is small.
Panic attacks every night. So that is a live check-in on the youth of the Democrat Party. Panic attacks every night. We're going back to the 1930s. And some really, really important analysis right there at the top of her comments. Donald Trump can go screw himself. That's what she said.
I
mean, ladies and gentlemen, I've been in the media game quite some time now. I'm not sure that I've ever heard any sort of astute political analysis like that in my time following media. I speak the truth, Reuel. I don't know, Nikki. I don't know what to tell you guys. I try speaking the truth to the people, the good people of southeastern North Carolina. I don't know what to say.
But nobody else is calling them out. Nobody else is calling and saying to these folks, you're really, I mean, I go back to that picture of the woman looking up and screaming at Donald Trump's, and they're back. For some reason, they're back. You would think they had 4 years of therapy, but they are back.
Yeah. Well, here's the sad part about it is, I was not happy when Biden won the election, by no means. But my life didn't go down the tubes. I didn't lose sleep over it. I didn't have panic attacks. I mean, I focused my energy where it would be the most beneficial. I focused my energy on my family. I focused my energy on myself. At that time, I was running a campaign. I focused my energy on the places that you can really start making some impact. And I don't feel like sitting behind a podium telling people that you're having panic attacks because the big bad man is back in the White House. It is beneficial for anyone. It seems like you're in a really deep, dark place and actually I think might need some help.
It's their entire identity. I mean, that's really what this revolves around. Nikki, I'll echo everything that you just said. I was incredibly unhappy with what we saw over the last 4 years. I made that very public and obvious. I can promise you I didn't lose any sleep over it. I can promise you I didn't spend my random Monday nights standing in front of Thalian Hall in downtown Wilmington yelling and screaming about how awful Biden was. Just went on with my life and, hoped for something better in the future and put some work in to try and make that a reality. It's a very stark difference between how the left operates when they're not in power versus the right. You just don't see the same thing.
Your show is on the mornings at nickcraig.com. You're also on Rumble. You also broadcast live on X and Facebook, as well as on your own website, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, YouTube, Rumble, and X at 7 o'clock. And the good news is it's available pretty much right after the show by 8:30 every morning. It's available in the podcast app, so individuals don't have to worry about catching it live. They can listen throughout the day on the ride home the next morning, whatever's most convenient for them.
Now, you were on the radio from 6 to 9 for close to almost 4 years here in Wilmington, right?
Yeah, a little over 3.
And that came to an abrupt end.
It did.
What happened?
Well, obviously, we were dealing with some rather tumultuous political times. You remember back to the summer, mid-July, when you had somebody attempt to shoot and kill not only the former president of the United States, but the guy that was actively campaigning and then would later go on to win the presidential election back in November. And there was a big scramble as to how to handle such a tricky subject of which it very much is. It's not very often that you have a president. There's of course always threats against a president, regardless of party. People say things, Secret Service visits them. It doesn't happen very often where you have somebody actually getting a gun close enough to a president to actually potentially kill them. We've only seen it a couple of times in modern history here in America, and that created a very interesting political environment that unfortunately caused a kind of an impasse between me and where I was previously working, and that relationship ended in mid-July of last year.
It's unfortunate because that is what talk radio was meant to do. Is that it's designed to allow folks to air their issues and to grieve together, to get angry together, to mourn together, to get excited together. And all of a sudden that came to a halt because of decisions that some folks made, and that's just unfortunate. But I'm glad that you're back on the air.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to be back on and talking about the issues that I feel are important, whether that be something going on locally where you just mentioned, Reuel. There's very little coverage of things that happen locally in Wilmington. We've got a couple of media outlets here. Most of them tend to lean to the left. Statewide, you've got a couple of great media outlets. Full disclosure, I do some work with CarolinaJournal.com. They're a phenomenal statewide news outlet, but there's not all of that much local political news that takes place here in Wilmington outside of just a few publications and outlets.
Yeah, and full disclosure, whenever Nikki writes anything for us, she just basically copies and pastes from the Carolina Journal. So it's a good publication. Nikki and I were talking about an issue of all this comes around to an idea of free speech. Nikki, we had talked about something before the podcast started.
Yeah, we were talking about what happened with Margaret Brennan, from a host from CBS, when she was doing an interview with Mark Rubio, and her exact comments, I'm going to put quotations around it, is free speech was weaponized and used to conduct a genocide. And is that what the left really feels, that having free speech, or, X is now the mecca of free speech, and even Facebook says that they're not going to take down free speech, because then it becomes who decides what is misinformation or disinformation. So talk to us a little bit about free speech and where you play a part in that. You play a huge part in free speech. And do you feel that Margaret Brennan was spot on with this?
Well, but to go back just a little bit, her comments all came up from J.D. Vance's comments last Friday at the Munich Security Conference, obviously Munich in Germany. And it's important to note, and I've gotten a crash course on this over the last couple of days, what many European countries deem as free speech is almost unrecognizable compared to what we in America determine as free speech. It's very different. What they think is free speech, we would say is government controlling speech. They think it's free. We've got two very different systems, and for her to make the analogy that somehow a genocidal atrocity takes place because too many people were able to speak freely is to say it's absurd, Nikki, is probably an understatement. To say it's a misunderstanding of history is disingenuous. It's complete and total political pandering to do something that unfortunately the American public have had to hear for the last 10 years, which is Donald Trump and his supporters are authoritarians and akin to the Nazi revolution that we saw 100 years ago. That's the attempt. In any way that they can shoehorn that in there, they'll attempt to do it, even though it really hasn't worked in the past for them.
One of the interesting differences is that in Europe, the rights that they have are given from the government. And here in the United States, our rights are inherently given to us by our Creator. And that is something they have a hard time understanding. But let's be honest, is that this whole idea of bringing up the terms fascist, bringing up the terms Nazi is not by mistake. Is that this is an ongoing, as you said, strategy to link everything about Trump to Nazism, to fascism, to far right extremism that folks like the Wilmington Conservative and Republicans and Trump and everybody else decry. That's not what we're all about.
I actually encourage that conversation from the left. They've been running with it for 10 years now. I mean, Trump announced his presidency in late 2015. They've been trying to draw this straw man analogy to Trump and his supporters to some sort of authoritarian fascism regime since then. They've been unsuccessful twice. He just had a massive landslide victory just back a couple of months ago, 7 of 7 swing states, winning the popular vote for the first time in 20-something years for a Republican. I encourage the left to continue with this kind of ridiculous pandering because it's obviously not something that resonates with the American people, and it forces more people to probably turn off that media, turn off that content than anything else.
I find it funny that all throughout social media, all these folks who went out and bought Teslas for the last 4 years are now selling them. they're you've got memes with the swastika on the side of them and everything else that they don't want to buy Nazi. They don't want to have a Nazi car anymore because of Elon Musk. It's just.
Let me just say this. Don't you just love, I mean, this guy, Trump. Elon Musk, was the darling of the left just a couple of years ago. Solar City, which, by the way, he bought, which was receiving huge subsidies from the federal government back during the Obama administration. You had Tesla that, of course, was revolutionary in regards to electric vehicles. Democrats and progressives loved driving their Teslas around. It became their cultural icon. He's got this underground subway system thing that he's testing out in California. They loved this guy. And in the matter of like 8 months, he went from their savior to another surprising term that we always hear, the biggest threat to democracy that we've ever seen. It's amazing how somebody can be the darling of the left and then immediately be their enemy literally with the snap of a finger. That's as quickly as it happened with Elon Musk. I mean, if you went back a year ago, everybody still loved him.
Yeah.
And now they hate him, despise him.
Same thing with Trump, though. How many people were his best friend, thought he was so great until he ran for president, and it's sad.
Very.
So you are on this new media. You are joining the likes of Oh, I just lost them all. You're joining the likes of the Ruthless podcast. You're joining the likes of Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson and Rogan. Rogan is making a serious threat at our standings in the podcast ratings. But what is the future of this new media that all of us are now taking advantage of? Is this where people are going to start getting their news from?
So to take a step back from that, going back to my roots and where essentially all podcasts spawned was radio, which has been a medium now that has existed for 115 years. The late 1910s is when it really started kicking off and stations started coming on the air. That's what the new media is now. That's where it all spawned. And radio over the last 20 years has dealt with a significant decline. And unfortunately, let me say this, full transparency ahead. I love radio. I am a radio nerd. I love the technology. I think it's absolutely fascinating. When I'm in my car, I'm, for the most part, listening to traditional terrestrial radio, whether that be AM or FM. So I still love the medium, and there's still a very important place for that medium. But over the last 20 years, it's been eroded. And unfortunately, because of the technological times that we live in, case in point, what the three of us are doing right now, sitting on a video call and having this back and forth conversation in real time, radio is going the way of what newspapers are. I mean, if you're a subscriber to the Wilmington Star News, your paper now comes in the mail with the postal service. It's a day, 2, 3 days out of print by the time it makes it in your mailbox, right? We've seen the erosion of the newspaper industry over the last 20 years. And unfortunately, radio is going to follow them just due to technology. And after that, it will be local television is going to follow suit because the market is shrinking. Nikki, you've got younger children. I mean, their friends are not watching television. I mean, they're not hanging out in front of the TV. They're watching all of their content on their phones. And there's this idea in media that you have to meet the audience where they are. That's the kind of the North Star that you follow in the media realm. Meet the audience where they are. And for radio, and you're seeing it in television as well, the audience is now on a cell phone or inside of a browser, whether it be YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, whatever various service you'd like to call it or equate it with. And this new media that we're seeing, which isn't necessarily new, podcasting's been around since the early 2000s. We saw the impact that it had in this last presidential election. In 1 week, Joe Rogan had Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk on his podcast. I mean, those things combined have hundreds of millions of views across all of those platforms. CNN's got like 114,000 people watching. Joe Rogan's pulling a couple 100 million over a 3-day period of time with some interviews. So it's changing dramatically, Reuel.
Well, it's also on X. They have the platform on X where you can do live streaming, and Trump and Elon Musk were on it. It's been a while since they've been on it, but they actually broke the system. They couldn't. It went down for a long time because there were so many people trying to log into this X platform to listen. It wasn't even a visual thing. It was just listening to Elon Musk and Trump talk. It was pretty awesome to watch that happen too. Did anyone get into that? I don't think I think I know a handful of people that were able to get on and listen to it, but
that was a Twitter space. I think that was back in August, maybe.
It was a Twitter space
when that took place.
Yeah,
I think so. And actually, well, I think they had already switched it over to X, so it wasn't Twitter anymore.
It was an X space.
X space.
It's an X space. But the other thing that's happening with podcasts like this, if I were a politician, I would hesitate going on the traditional media where I get 20 to 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the outside to talk to my constituents, to answer questions. And on these podcasts that we're on, this new media, it is a longer time for folks to have a conversation. Joe Rogan requires 3 hours. If you're going to go on his show, you have to commit to 3 hours. On your show, you're an hour, and you bring guests in all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, when you look at traditional media, we're talking about television or radio, they have a finite level of resources available, right? And it's their literal airtime. They have one channel that is available for 24 hours a day, and they have to figure out how to segment and block off that programming. And when you transition over to new media, the likes of Joe Rogan and some other shows, that barrier is completely gone because for example, a local television station to operate, it is incredibly expensive to do so. The resources required to have a license from the FCC and to operate the broadcast facilities that are required to make something like that possible, it's the same thing for radio, is incredibly expensive. So they're very careful as to what they do with that time. And, you know, these are all advertiser driven businesses, Reuel and Nikki. I mean, that's the reality is if you don't have enough people watching or listening, you're not going to be able to sell advertising. And it's incredibly expensive to operate. If you went and bought a radio station today, I mean, you'd be in at least probably close to $100,000 a year in rent for the tower facility and the equipment associated with it. You've got to make up $100,000 a year in advertising to break even. That's with no staff, with no other additional equipment, with no additional resources available. It is a very, very expensive venture.
As opposed to podcasting, where we do have advertisers. On your show, you've got advertisers. We're working on advertisers on this show. Is the overhead is far less, and the reach is far greater. People can go on and listen to the show anytime they want. They can do it at double speed if they want to. They can take it wherever they want to go. And as I said before, you have as much time with folks as you want. On your air show, in an hour time, how much content were you able to give in an hour time?
I think per hour, I think it was about 42 minutes worth of content per hour. So it was a decent amount. But it was 42 minutes of content per hour. So you add it up, it's, you know, about a little over an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes a morning, something in that ballpark, depending on the commercial avails. So you're getting all of that content crammed into a smaller period of around the same period of time, but the actual time it takes to produce is so much less. But I will say one thing about traditional media, and you mentioned, Reuel, earlier, you know, politicians doing traditional media. It's the legitimacy that comes with being on terrestrial media. I mean, the reason I was able to interview Donald Trump twice, once during, or three times maybe, the only way I was able to get those interviews was because I was on a terrestrial radio station. It brought that legitimacy to the interview, to the conversation. When you've got a million people doing podcasts, and Trump did do some podcasts. We talked about Joe Rogan, Aiden Ross. He did some shows during the 2024 cycle. But that call sign that you get associated by the FCC, the frequency that you're on, or the channel that you're on, if you're TV, that carries a lot of weight in terms of legitimacy. However, that will shift and change over time. And 5 years from now, that barrier probably won't exist.
Well, we normally we don't tell people ahead of time who's going to come on as a guest, but we thought it would be kind of fun because I know my neighbor was devastated when you were no longer on the radio. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with his life. So we
Same.
put it out. So we put it out there and we told people that you were going to be coming on our show and if they had any questions. So we do have an audience question for you. And I really like this audience question because it seems like you stay inside the political arena a lot. And I think you and I have actually talked about this before because I started asking some personal questions about you and you were like, why are you asking me these things? And I'm like, because you're a person. You have a life, and outside of the podcast and outside of political. So anyway, the audience question is, how did you get into this career? Was this an accident? Were you just looking for a job? Or is this something that you, radio and having that voice that you have, this is something you knew you wanted to do? So how did you get into this?
Have you guys ever been in a situation where you're walking up a flight of stairs and stumble? Right? That is how I can describe my advent into radio. No, to answer your question, no, it was not what I planned on or really envisioned getting into. My background is computer science technology. That's what my degree's in. The stars kind of aligned. There was some opportunities available going back at this point, almost a decade ago, with a startup radio station here in Wilmington. At the time it was the new Big Talker FM, and I had the opportunity to move from the great state of New York to North Carolina, which wasn't much of a sell, and live 12 minutes from the beach. So I took a leap of faith on that, relatively low risk, potentially high reward, and had the opportunity to do that for a couple of years, and then transition to my my role in hosting a morning talk show. So no, it was not what I planned on getting into. I always loved the medium. I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh when I was younger. I used to really enjoy the technology of radio and everything associated with it. But I didn't set out to initially host or have a show, and when I first moved down here, I didn't. I was behind the scenes doing technical work, and hosting a show for an hour on Sundays. So that's how it originally started.
Rush Limbaugh was. Go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Now, does your family in New York? They're still in New York, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Your parent and your sister. No, your sister's not in New York anymore.
She is.
Oh, she is. Okay. Well, do they listen to your show now that you're on all the airwaves?
Yes, they've been huge supporters of everything that I've done since day one. And yeah, it's the one of the benefits of being available on all of these platforms is that worldwide reach if you can break through the noise. And that's really the key with it. Like Reuel was mentioning, the overhead, the startup costs are relatively limited. Then you're faced with the question of, what do I do that's unique, that makes me different than the 100 other podcasts that might have similar insights or similar opinions to the things that I might have? And I say this all the time, and I don't say it as a joke. I don't think I bring anything all that unique to the table. I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, there's nothing inherently unique about what I think about things. The uniqueness is the insight and the hyper local focus of things that go on in Wilmington, which you don't see in the 30-second news blip on traditional television or written on a couple of websites throughout the area. That's the uniqueness that I bring. It's not necessarily the insight. There's other people that are much more qualified to be pontificating on that stuff than me.
I honestly have to say, the uniqueness is you're willing to call someone an idiot when they're being an idiot. And I was one of those people on multiple occasions. Now, I do have to ask, because Jesse Waters talks about this a lot, and you are about the same age as my kids, and I can see myself calling them up and saying, why did you say that? Does your mom ever say, Nick, why did you say that? Why did they ever call you out, or are they just incredibly proud? I'm proud of you, and you're not even my son, so...
They don't call me out. My mother texted me the other day and thought that it was funny that I was making myself laugh on the air. So that was her. I think I was doing a Mitch McConnell impression, and I started laughing because it was funny. And so that was her insight that she she brought.
What's up with Mitch McConnell? I mean, has he finally lost it? I mean, he's old. He's out in next year. And he's burning up the shop as he goes out. I just don't know what's going on with him, because at one point he and Trump had buried the hatchet, but now he's got the hatchet back out. It's disappointing, actually.
Very much so.
Well, from Mitch McConnell to local politics, it's 2025, Nick. We've got city council and the mayoral race that is coming up. Just today, or just yesterday, the Port City Daily announced that a candidate who had run and lost for county commission she is now running for city council. What's your take on the upcoming Wilmington race?
Nikki, one of the things that I bring is the uniqueness and my bluntness, like you were mentioning. Here's the reality. The demographics within the city of Wilmington for Republicans is not great. And I would argue, and I said this privately and publicly, as we are having this conversation right now, tonight, or whenever you're listening to this podcast, New Hanover County is not getting better for Republicans in the future. There are more and more individuals moving to this area. There was a study I was reading this morning that Gen X and millennials are the largest group of move-ins to the state of North Carolina. For the most part, those individuals tend to lean a little bit more to the left. Wilmington is a very attractive place to live. And so the demographics for Republicans are not great. We saw in the last city council election, Republicans got swept. I mean, it was a rough election cycle for Republicans in 2023. One of the benefits of the city council race is that there are not partisan labels on those various candidates. Like when you voted in November, you would see an R&D next to candidates' names. There isn't that. So there is some a little bit of ambiguity. It's hard to go into a ballot box without being informed and know who the Republicans are and who the Democrats are. It's going to be a very tough election for Republicans. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse as time goes on, because the city is not growing in a way that is effective for Republicans to either hold power or even get any seat. And all you have to do to look at examples of that is Charlotte and Wake and the city of Raleigh, where it is damn near impossible for a Republican to get elected to any position within those municipalities because of the very Democrat-leaning demographics that those major cities have. And Wilmington's not far behind.
You are a millennial. You and I have clashed often.
That is not true.
You are
not a millennial.
What are you?
I'm a Gen Z.
You're a Gen Z. Oh, okay.
I am.
All right. You make the millennials look good. So the Gen Z and the millennials are moving into the area. I'm Gen X. We're done.
Okay, boomer.
No, I'm not a boomer. I'm Gen X. We're very, very careful about that. But studies have shown that millennials, Gen Z, and the generation that's coming up behind them have less party affiliation and are more issue oriented. So how do we reach out to them?
Issue?
And what are the issues that folks are worried about that we need to talk to them about?
Well, unfortunately, one of the big issues as you're talking about younger individuals is something that the left has done a really good job at messaging and has almost complete control over, and it's the discussion about abortion. The left has done a phenomenal job demonizing women's rights. We heard at the anti-Trump protests that took place Monday in Wilmington. One of the speakers made the point that her daughter and her are now second-class citizens. That's what she said. I don't know how that's the case, but that's the claim that she made. And the left has done a very good job at owning the issue of reproductive rights, women's rights. The issue is abortion. Republicans have had a really bad message in regards to this. It's a very complicated issue to discuss. And for the most part, Republicans have kind of buried their head in the sand on it, and they've allowed the left to own the message. And anytime Republicans talk about it or even murmur the word, they are immediately, there's all these words and attacks thrown at them. We saw the billboards during this last election cycle about it here against some of our state legislative candidates. So that's one of the biggest issues that the left owns. However, the other issue that they don't own is the economy. You've got these younger individuals that are just getting out of college, trying to get their lives started, getting married, having kids, having those very deep, intimate discussions with their partner. And if you follow through with the economic agenda that we saw over the last couple of years, it does not create a prosperous environment for those younger individuals. And I think that's in large part why you saw such a success for Republicans in the November election of last year, was because of the economy. Those are two of the biggest issues that are important for that younger voting bloc. However, with all of that said, the issue is engagement. Younger voters, and I've seen the same studies, Rule, that you're talking about, that show that these groups are leaning more conservative and maybe a little bit more right-leaning. The problem is they don't vote. I mean, they just stay home, and they're sure as hell going to stay home for a city council election that has no partisan labels on it. I mean, you talk about having zero vested interest. If you're not going to show up for that race at all, the voter turnout for these elections are pitiful, and so that's a huge issue, is how do you get these individuals engaged enough to care and actually show up?
At this last election, Harry Knight was just on with us. Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, he said 82 to 85% turnout for Republicans. If we get the same amount downtown, is that possible to hold and switch? Are those numbers possible downtown?
Yeah, I mean, if you got essentially every registered Republican to turn out and vote for a Republican candidate, absolutely. But the practicality is, come a municipal, not midterm elections, right? We're not talking about 2026. We're talking about 2025, when there is nothing on the top of the ballot, right? We're going to have a very contentious Senate race that takes place next year. But when the only race on there is mayor and city council and, maybe some bond referendums or things like that, the turnout is going to be something like 13, 18%. And that's all you're going to get. That is a very small group of individuals that are very politically engaged. And unfortunately, that political engagement within these inner cities are the groups like we were talking about earlier, this Women Organizing for Wilmington, which is a far left progressive group that activates their voters. Republicans don't have anything akin to that. Obviously, you've got the local Republican Party, but they're unable to mobilize like these so-called nonpartisan groups that we were talking about earlier. It's a very tough nut to crack for the GOP and for Republicans.
Well, I did see that President Day, Not My President rallies were happening across the country. So it's not like our wonderful people of WOW came up with an idea all on their own and ran with it. So it's something that I think the left has a little bit more of an advantage over a lot of our conservatives, is they have an impeccable way of motivating people through their propaganda. They get people fired up and they run with one message. What do you think our municipal Republicans need to focus on going into this election? I'm hoping that we have some really strong candidates that are going to step up for these municipal races, but what do you think their messaging needs to be? What's going to be strong? Or do they still need to go on this economy? They did get a 7% tax increase almost immediately after the last municipal race. So is that something they still need to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the election locally is going to come down to growth. I mean, we saw that in the last Wilmington City Council election, and it played a huge part even in the county commission race that we saw in November of 2024 that took place. Wilmington is geographically the New Hanover County, is geographically the second smallest county in the state of North Carolina. We're landlocked by the Cape Fear River to the west, and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. To the south, it's the mouth of the Cape Fear River and the ocean spit out there. There's nowhere else to go. So it's growth and development that tends to be the biggest issues, as this area has seen unbelievable amounts of growth over the last couple of years. That to me will probably be the decision, or the deciding factor of who wins the city council, those city council races, who can message on growth.
We have, speaking of the party, the local Republican Party, we have a convention coming up, and we've got new leadership that's going to be installed. And Nikki and I have some announcements on that after we're done. without talking about the specific slates that are running, what are they going to have to focus on in order to make us successful, not just this year, but as you said, we've got a huge Senate race coming up next year, where we've got whoever wins the primary is going to go up against Cooper, because it's going to be Cooper on the Democrat side. So what do these incoming leaders have to do?
I want to go back to something that Nikki mentioned with these left-wing activist groups that are very good at mobilizing their people. This has been something that has always really it's been incredibly frustrating to me as somebody that has been involved with things on the party side, have been in things involved outside of that in media, in various spaces. Republicans, for the most part, talk a big game. I mean, they say that they're in favor of freedom and lower taxes and so on and so forth. But when the rubber meets the road, Republicans are inherently incredibly lazy when it comes to that. So many folks are unwilling to put either their time, treasure, or talent actually in the race. And fortunately, there are some very gracious donors here that help candidates and help the local Republican Party. But I mean, if Republicans just gave, even if 5% of them that had the financial means or the time means to actually get involved and do something, if even 5% of them actually got in the fight instead of posting on Facebook all the time or making snide comments to their friends while they're golfing, I think things would be completely different. It's you've got, like, look at NPR, for example. Democrats put their money where their mouth are. They fully fund NPR through their begathon drives that they do every year, where they plead for people to donate money. They are incredibly successful at doing that. Republicans trying to raise money from conservatives and Republicans is like trying to get blood out of a stone. It doesn't work. And it's a huge cultural issue that conservatives and Republicans are going to have to deal with, because the left is able to mobilize their people and get money out of them, and Republicans just can't, because to the credit of many of these individuals, they're busy. They're raising their families. They're running their small businesses. I get all of that. But if you're say you care about the message, you say you care about these issues, you've got to be willing to put in one way or the other. And that's going to be the biggest issue for the Republican Party going forward. And of course, the lagging effects of that are what resources are available for candidates like the city council, what resources are available for candidates like the Board of Education, like county commission, like our General Assembly members. There's very much a trickle-down effect with that, and Republicans are awful with actually getting in the fight.
Nikki, how much of your time was spent fundraising?
Oh, too much. Too much. It is extremely difficult, because you're just constantly selling yourself, selling your message constantly. It's hard to ask for money. It's hard to. I have a nonprofit, but it's very easy to raise money for a nonprofit because you're like, you can get behind that. Selling yourself and telling people, I do have integrity. I'll do what you need me to do. And you honestly, as many Republicans as there are out there, it's a plethora of opinions and how to do things and how it should be run. And there are a few Republicans out there that have no problem writing a check and saying, I believe in you. And there are a few Republicans saying, I believe in you. I'm going to give you this check, but I expect you to vote exactly the way I want you to. And I'm sure it's the same way on the other side. But getting back to Nick's point about Republicans being lazy, we're so complacent. We're living our lives and we're thinking, someone else is going to take care of that. That's why I go to the ballot box to vote for someone that's going to do that. And that gets us into trouble every single time. We need to start getting involved. And it doesn't even have to be putting yourself on a pedestal. It doesn't have to mean getting in front of a podcast. Sometimes it can be as simple as writing a letter or starting a postcard campaign or a text campaign, or just helping a candidate behind the scenes, wearing a t-shirt, putting stamps on envelopes. I mean, there's some really simple things that you can do to help. And I wish I really hope that Republicans will start getting involved. And I'd love to see some of our younger Republicans, even the independents coming in. And if you're even a little bit right leaning, even a little bit conservative, dip your toes in a little bit, get involved. That's what I would love to see.
We are coming up to 8:43 Eastern Standard Time, and Nick is on the radio early tomorrow at 0500 because you do a broadcast for the Carolina Journal, and then you get probably an hour's of sleep, and then you come back on and do your 7 o'clock. So we're gonna start wrapping up. But Nick, some final words from you tonight. Are you hopeful about the things that are going on, and where are you going to go next?
Where I'm going to go next is to bed. Am I hopeful about things going on? Yeah, I think so. I mean, to go to the highest level of this, President Trump, his platform is MAGA, Make America Great Again. And I think that we're in a golden age, or transitioning hopefully into a golden age for our country. The president's got the right people surrounding him to make some of those things a reality. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the last 4 weeks since he's been in the Oval Office. So I think the next couple of years are going to be a lot of fun for folks on our side of the political aisle. A lot of the things that Republicans have yelled and screamed about for 40 years are actually getting done. So I'm very, if I was investing, I'd say I'd be very long on America for our future. I think we will continue to be a very prosperous nation. And ending, I want to say this to you guys. What you're doing with the Wilmington Conservative is exactly what we were just talking about with individuals unwilling to do it. Because it would be easy for you guys to go, well, I'm sure somebody else will take care of this. Somebody else is going to put the time, money, and effort into doing this. And I hope going forward that Republicans really buy into this message. And I think too much of it is, Republicans are business-minded individuals. They're always looking for the ROI on whether it's their money or their time, which is a good way, of course, to look at things. But left doesn't worry about that when they're funding outlets like NPR, when they're donating to campaigns. Yes, you want a return on your investment, but at the same time, if you're going to be completely sidelined because you're hell-bent on an ROI, the left's going to continue to democratize the issue. So appreciate what you guys are doing. Appreciate the platform, and thanks for having me on this evening.
Well, before we let you go, we want the Wilmington Conservative is a business, and so are you, and you require and need help to keep on going. So how can people support you and find out more about you? Where can they go?
Well, first, tell if you have individuals and friends that used to listen to the morning show when it was on the radio. Let them know that the show's back on. It's the Nick Craig Show. It's available in all of your podcast apps, whatever platform you listen on. And we're going with a crowdfunding model through a service called Patreon, which if you're somebody that watches a lot of YouTube content, you're probably familiar with the website where individuals can chip in $5, $10, $15 a month to support your content. So that's over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. And we've had a good group of people come on board over the last month or so. And their support has been incredible and very gracious. So very much appreciate them.
And just like our show here on all the platforms as well, just hitting that like and subscribe button also helps. It helps with monetary income because advertisers look at those listens and those follows, and it also helps get the word out. Nick Craig from the Nick Craig Show. Thanks a lot for joining us, my friend.
Reuel, Nikki, thanks guys, appreciate it.
We're going to put you back in the green room,
Thank
and as soon as my mouse starts working, we're going to start. We're going to put you back in the
timeout chair. You're firing me.
We're going to put you back in the. We're going to. You know what? It's conversations like this that the robotic transcription device that just has a heart attack over. So I'm going to put you back in the green room, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks again, Nick.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, Nick.
Fantastic.
I really it's so crazy when I start talking to him, and I have so much respect for his political mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think about, hey, I'm as old. He could be my kid, but I really I hope other people start listening to him. When he first told me how early it was in the morning, I was like, that ain't happening. But today, I was just folding laundry, and I didn't watch, but I did listen, and it well, because you called in the middle, and I'm like, I can't talk. I'm listening to Nick Craig right now, and you're like, is it good today? Yes, it is. You
It's
need
good.
to listen to
Of
this
course
one.
it's good.
It was great.
Well,
I loved it. I loved it.
we hope.
I do find it very interesting that we had a critic come on our podcast, not come on our podcast, but comment on our podcast about how we weren't transparent. That if we're going to be these MAGA fascists, then we need to come right out and say it. Well, for one, we are the Wilmington Conservative, and number two, I want this critic to go to that group that just said they're nonpartisan and call them out, because it's not that they're not being transparent. They're flat out lying.
They're flat out lying. Yes.
They are not. Anyway, different story, different podcast, I guess.
Well, before we go any farther, while we were talking to Nick, we brought up the issue of the Republican convention, the New Hanover County Republican Convention that is coming up on March 3rd. If you are a Republican registered by January 31st, 2025, and you have to be registered as a Republican by that date, then you may register. As far as we know, there are 2 slates running for chair, vice chair, second vice chair, secretary, and treasurer.
For our local New Hanover County GOP office, these are all brand new slates. They're brand new leadership, and how exciting! Huh?
So what are we going to do, Nikki?
Well, Reuel, I'll tell you. I am actually tomorrow and the next day, I'm going to reach out to the leadership of the 2 slates and see if we can have them on the podcast. So what I'm thinking is next week, if I can get them both on, what we'll do is we'll dedicate 20 minutes to 30 minutes for the first slate and 20 to 30 minutes to the second slate. See what their ideas are on the leadership and where we need to go in our county and what plans they have. I think it's going to be very interesting to hear from both of these slates. We're giving them both a platform. We're not going to, and you and I actually had a conversation about that. This isn't a personal game. I want the information out there because everyone needs to make a choice for themselves.
Yes.
And that is the beauty of free speech. And I feel like we're running our podcast with integrity, and it would not be fair if we only allowed one slate to say their piece or to share their information. So I think it would be great if both of them came on, tell us what's going on, and I hope our Republican people around the New Hanover County will tune in and listen to what these slates have to say. If they're not able to come to the GOP meeting or our town halls, or I think both of the slates have websites at this point. But I think it'll be a great opportunity. I'd love to hear from both of them as well.
That sound that you're hearing is a gauntlet falling on the floor, if I interpret that right. And the only editing that we'll do, and we'll say this right now, the only editing that we'll do is just mashing them, the 2 things together into one podcast, so you don't have to listen to 2 podcasts. So if you,
and we'll ask both slates the exact same questions.
Yep.
And they will be given the exact same time. And it'll be recorded, so it's not like one can listen to the other one, and They won't know.
Yep.
I'm excited. I hope they both take the opportunity to talk to us.
And since this podcast is actually going up on Wednesday, if you are listening and you want to meet the candidates in person, the final town hall meeting of the current Republican leadership is this Thursday, the 20th.
Yep.
And you can go meet them.
You can go meet them, weather permitting. I know we've got a little bit of weather coming in.
Yeah.
Even schools are on, New Hanover County schools are on a 2-hour delay on Thursday. But weather permitting, if you plan on going to the convention, you need to pre-register. That's one thing. You need to pre-register. So it's on New Hanover County GOP website. It's on their social media. And make sure you show up to the convention between 5 and 6:30. Doors close at 6:30, and bring your driver's license.
That's right. You must be in line by 6:30, and you must have a driver. You must have an ID. It could be your driver's license. It could be your passport. Anything that's accepted at the polls, we accept at the Republican convention. So, Nikki Baskin,
Yay.
I'm glad that you're back from vacation. You are all rested up. You look about the same, but you.
I have color.
It's good. It's good to have you back. Until
you.
next week, Nikki. I'm Reuel Sample.
I'm Nikki Bascom.
And this has been the Nikki and Reuel podcast experience. Thanks for joining us.